Thank you for being here this morning for such an important effort and organization as Bridges of Understanding. The subject of our discussion for the next few minutes is on the role of new media in the digital world. But I would suggest that the phrase new media is a little bit outdated because we're really here to discuss, and it was touched on certainly in the prior panel, social media as a tool for empowerment. Or is it? Not that many years ago, social media would have been consisting of a written letter, a phone call, or remember when we used to think that a long-distance call was a very big deal. 10 years or so ago, email would have been added to that list. Now, of course, we have thousands of blogs, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Pinterest, Facebook, LinkedIn, and on and on. And what we can pretty well predict is that as we sit here this morning, there is some young entrepreneur working on the next best thing in China, Syria, Saudi Arabia, or Silicon Valley. It will be faster, easier to use, reach a global audience instantly, and in time will make a tweet seem like those handwritten letters of yesteryear. So, our panelists. Sohrab Al-Khali is a Syrian-American community organizer and advertising executive. He currently serves as president of NAAP National, a network of Arab American professionals focused on empowering the Arab American and Muslim community. He's also active in solidarity efforts in the Syrian Revolution. His parents came to the U.S. As young people. He carries 3 passports. Holly Gordon, to Sohrab's right, is the executive producer of the film Girl Rising, Educate Girls, Change the World, a global movement for young girls' education. Many of you I know have already seen the film, and it catalogs in a poignant and moving way the situation of girls in developing countries and the power of education to change the trajectory of their lives. Holly was recently selected by Fast Company magazine as a member of the League of Extraordinary Women in 2013 and named by Newsweek Daily Beast as one of 125 women of impact this year as well. Quite a year, Holly. I've known Holly for a number of years and have always been impressed by her indomitable spirit and tenacity to make sure that these girls' stories were told to a global audience. She's accomplished that brilliantly. Fatima is a Saudi Arabian master's candidate in Women, Gender, and Islamic Studies at Harvard. On Saturday evening, I had the pleasure of catching up with Fatima on the phone while she was in the library at school. And I kept thinking, I can call someone in a library on a Saturday evening at Harvard. Well, anyway, I guess it's only part, Fatima, of the new world order. She has worked for organizations fighting the abuse of women and children in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. She developed a passion for women's emancipation as the basis of a just society. She graduated in psychology from the premier women's university in Jeddah, ETHA. On our recent trip, and I was along with Nina on the most recent trip to Saudi Arabia, we had the pleasure of meeting ETHA's president and 25 of its top students for a discussion about their lives and goals. Fatima actually lived for a moment in Bloomington, Indiana, when her father was pursuing his graduate degree at the university. And last year, lest she have any spare time, when she moved to Boston, rather than starting her master's immediately, she took a serious painting course at the Museum of Fine Arts. Last but not least, Janet Breslin-Smith has spent a career in public service. Her commitment to women's higher education in the Middle East has been her driving passion. From 2009 to 13, she lived in Saudi Arabia when her husband Jim was U.S. ambassador. She formerly served as president of national security for 14 years at the National War College and was the first woman to chair the Department of National Security Strategy. She's the author of the National War College column, A History of Strategic Thinking in War and Peace. She also served on the staffs of 3 U.S. senators and is the president of Crosswinds Consulting Group. Before our recent trip to Saudi Arabia, I talked with Janet on the phone to hear her thoughts about our upcoming trip. What I remember the most from our conversation was her enthusiasm for the 4+ years that she and her husband spent in that country, where they traveled extensively. Her advice to me and to our group: listen more than talk, and be careful not to judge. Most of all, she said that we would be incredibly impressed by the total dedication and preservation of family values and traditions, and that was apparent at each and every step on our journey. So that is the thumbnail sketch of our panel, so let's just jump right in. The subject, social media. It is acknowledged to have played a major role in the series of uprisings that have come to be known as Arab Spring. As we will all recall, in Tunisia, it was just one street vendor, so frustrated with his dealings with his government that he set himself on fire, only to have it captured on video and literally went viral in seconds. In Cairo, in Tahrir Square, the excess use of force by the authorities was filmed and circulated around that country first, leading to an outpouring of opposition to the Mubarak regime. In time, of course, it collapsed, to be replaced by the Muslim Brotherhood's Mohammed Morsi, who some months later was ousted by the Egyptian military. What's next? Now, constantly, we see cell phone video of the fighting in Syria, the violence there, and we will get to this in a few minutes, but also the whole issue and protest of women driving in Saudi. As moderator, I'm going to direct a question or two to our panel, but please do jump in. Keep it lively and no speeches. So, in terms of news-breaking events, what does it mean when everyone can be a reporter? Everyone with a cell phone, and that is almost everyone, can record what is transpiring and circulate a video, virtually without limit. What about the editing function? User verification. Does social media inform or empower? Does social media amplify voices of those marginalized? Is it a friend or is it a foe? Do we fear it or do we embrace it? So first, I'm going to turn to Sarab. You are a Syrian-American community organizer and also an advertising executive, which I, having grown up in marketing and sales in the publishing industry, find particularly ironic. And as it turns out, which I didn't know until 20 minutes ago, my former company, Hearst, bought the company where he now works. But anyway, get us started, Sarab. Thank you. Sarab is going to get us started. So give us a thought from both your perspective on the whole revolution, but also how social media has advanced that cause.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much.
Can you hear Sarab? We were told that we didn't.
Okay. Can people not hear me?
No. Could we have the other mic too, please?
Is this better?
Yes.
All right.
See, we told them that.
So first of all, thank you very much for having me today. It's fantastic being here with you this morning on this cold, cold day. In terms of social media as it relates to the Syrian revolution and beyond, first of all, it fundamentally has transformed the relationship between media, the individual, and state power in the Middle East. And I think that's the first thing to talk about and think about, is that everything has been turned upside down in places like Syria, where in an autocratic state, all aspects of information were controlled by the regime, tight control. And so there was no opportunity for anyone, as an individual, as a group, as a community, as a neighborhood, as a town, and so on and so on, to share information in a way that could inform the future of the nation, that is not in line with the official narrative of the regime. And so what social media did, it created alternative spaces for communication and shattered really the monopoly of communication as held by the regimes in play. So it's truly empowering. You asked the question, is it a friend or a foe? It's a friend, because what it has done is it's provided millions of individuals with the opportunity to share their voices, where for decades they did not have that opportunity. So not only is it something where we push communication out, and it's a message to kind of raise awareness, but also an opportunity to utilize social media to document the day-to-day aspects of revolution or life, if you will. They used to say that, the revolution is not televised, right? Well, every aspect of what's happening in Syria is actually covered on YouTube. The good, the bad, and the tremendously ugly as well. And we see this day in, day out. And I think it's something that people are actually putting their lives on the line to show the world. Now, another thing that's important is that social media is an organizing tool. And so often I think we hear about social media, is it the Twitter revolution, is it this, is it that? No, it's not a Twitter revolution. People on the ground are living, fighting, and dying to basically change the structures that be in their nations. However, social media is a tool, an organizing tool to enable that. So, you know, it's fundamentally transformed the universe that we see from the Middle East. It's helped the revolution. But also, as you see, the regime, whereas different than the Mubarak regime, for example, where Mubarak, if you recall, turned off the internet in the nation, the regime actually learned from those experiences, and from even before the revolution started, went on the offensive and used social media to monitor what's happening in terms of opposition activity, to bully people. There's something called the electronic shabiha, which is kind of the electronic militia that has been unleashed on the world to basically bully, hack, send viruses around, and to really use social media as an offensive weapon. So it's not just an empowerment vehicle for people, but it's also something that is actually very reactionary as a counter-revolution from the regimes that be as well.
Jim, do you want anybody else on the panel care to comment on that? Or to add to it?
My next question is for Holly. You have filmed and interviewed in many Middle Eastern countries for your documentary. What is your take on the question of empowerment as it relates to these young girls? And as you think about the context of our discussion this morning, I mean, what would social media, I mean, I know that a lot of those girls were pretty young, but what would social media mean to them? Do they have a cell phone? Do they tweet, etc.?
Thank you. Thank you for the beautiful introduction, and thanks all of you for coming today and for having me. I think the most important aspect of social media and of the storytelling that we're trying to do with Girl Rising is to create a platform for the voiceless. That what we're trying to do, so the challenge of social media is so much noise, right? As I heard you talking about, every day of the revolution is on YouTube. It's, boy, I haven't visited YouTube to go see much on the Syrian revolution because I'm doing so many other things and there's so many other places I'm getting news. So the challenge is sometimes there's so much information that nothing rises to the top. And so our challenge with Girl Rising was to try to weave strands of influence and attention together. That if we had only relied upon social media as a sort of platform to raise these girls' voices, you'd never hear them. But instead, we reached out to people that we know get across broadcast media, like the Meryl Streeps and Anne Hathaways and Alicia Keys, who lent their voice to make the film, right? So that would get us into traditional media, which would help push people to social media. We looked for partners like Intel, who had their own space on social media that has nothing to do with the girls' movement, to use their clout to get us into spaces where people would pay attention. So really for us, the idea was to create a bigger platform and then again, use social media as a tool to share these stories with other girls like these girls, both here in the United States, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, all over the world. So that what social media allows is the networking of voices, right? If you build a platform, then social allows the people who care about the thing that you're fighting for to feel less alone in their fight, if that makes sense.
Janet, you lived in Saudi for the last four and a half years, correct? During the Arab Spring. So when you think of the context of social media, or just you can take it in any direction that you want, give us your thoughts on what you saw literally on the ground. You're an expert on policy matters, and we would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Thanks. We've only been home 2 months, so I'm still getting used to the cold weather here. It's true that this social media revolution happened. I almost had a vision that I was watching it in the 4 years we were there. We got there in 2009. And I remember very clearly, I think I told Cathie the story, that one night there was a reception at our residence, and I knew I wanted to start using Twitter. This is before Egypt happened. And there was a young man, an Egyptian American on the embassy staff, and I asked him to show me how to use it. So I brought my laptop down. It was about 12:30 in the morning in Riyadh. And he showed me how to set it up and who to follow, who he recommended for me to follow in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia itself, in the region. And then he showed me a little search engine, and he said, show to me all of the tweets, in this case in English, within 25 kilometers of our residence. And what happened, and this is a sign of how old I am, the screen lit up with Twitter conversation in the dead of night. I mean, you know, women cannot drive, obviously, but just it was the middle of the night in Saudi Arabia. It was very quiet. There was nothing going on in the streets at all, and yet there were live and vibrant conversations. My first reaction was I shouldn't watch because I was eavesdropping. But then I realized, no, this is my children's generation. Everybody's putting their comments on Twitter in the public. And that's when I realized that in Saudi Arabia, especially among women, that the night was alive with conversation and close relationships were formed. And so yes, I think all of us, all of the panelists here in the previous panel have given you an idea that Twitter and all the social media has positive and negative. I mean, the forces can be organized for good and bad. It is a fact of life. And it does have more significance in societies where up till that point the media was controlled. So Saudi Arabia had Saudi 1 and Saudi 2 as television channels. When those television channels were introduced years ago, this was of deep social and religious concern in terms of the introduction of that level of media, television media. Now fast forward, and now we're into this new era, and certainly the access to it, as my husband says, every child in Saudi Arabia has either a BlackBerry or an iPhone. So their access to the world has completely changed. The only comment I have about this, and especially about Syria, last year, as we don't watch it obviously as much in this country, but I would say in Saudi Arabia, the coverage of Syria has been very intense and very deep. And the YouTube last year, I think it was about 6 months ago, maybe 8 months ago, there were a series of YouTube films of actually people on both sides, or the many sides of that fight, showing warriors, soldiers, dismembering each other and eating the liver of a fellow combatant. And when that happened, to me, and we could talk more about this later on, to me, this hopefully is the beginning of a deeper consideration within Islam itself on the depth of the problems that are being faced in the region. Because social media has allowed this to be seen. It has allowed a conversation, and I'm hoping that conversation will increasingly become, as King Abdullah has hoped, I think, become a dialogue between all sides of the views of this type of serious violence.
Would you care to add anything to that, Sarah?
You know, I agree. As I said earlier, I think at this point, revolution is ugly, and we have this romanticized view of what revolution looks like, and you know, the reaction to revolution and the reaction to popular demands for change, and that's what you see on TV on all sides of it. I think understanding context is one of the things that sometimes is missed out. I think it's the role of social media to put the content out there, but for the conversations to occur in these networks, as you kind of described it, to provide context to understand what's really happening. And I think that's key to really put perspective on what's happening. At the end of the day, you know, even today, for example, there is, you know, certain areas of Damascus suburbs that are under siege right now, totally surrounded. No food has gone in or out for about 300 days or so. And because of the lack of coverage in the mainstream media, basically many of the activists there, citizen journalists, have turned to social media to kind of spread awareness as to what they're going with. And you know, there's a blog that was set up 12 days ago to cover a hunger strike that many activists are taking place right now in this Damascus suburb. And you know, it's their only mechanism and outlet to the world to say, look at us, look at us, look at what's happening. So on one spectrum, you'll see this utter brutality and the ugliness of conflict. But on the other side, you'll see inspiration of what people are trying to overcome, such as the Stop the Siege kind of effort, where people are actually for 12, 13 days now on a hunger strike saying, this is my life, this is what I'm living for, I want to share this with you so you understand and empathize with what I'm going with as well.
So I just want to make sure we understood you correctly. Did you say that no food has come in or gone out in 300 days? That is nearly a year.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's certain areas of Damascus suburbs, and not just in Damascus, but in Homs and other areas as well, where there's literally been under a state of siege. It's actually called, the specific name of the campaign that the regime was pushing out was called the Starvation Until Submission campaign. And so literally, food is a weapon of war. And, this isn't just something, it's not in the mainstream news ever since, the red lines were talked about a few months ago, and, people pulled back from those. Syria has kind of dropped off the face of the news unless it's about, jihadists or nuns being captured. And if there's anything in between talked about, it's not happening in mainstream media. There's caricatures of conflict and binary kind of outlooks on what's happening in Syria. The reality is all on social media. And it's up to all of us to kind of go there to, one, see it for our own eyes, because that's what the people there living those conflicts want us to see.
Do you talk about it much with your parents?
Pardon me?
Do you talk about the revolution much with your parents?
Oh, of course, yeah. It's, I think it's fundamentally transformed the household as well. As I talked about how it's transformed society. Generationally, it's transformed relationships within families. And you saw it where early in the revolution, most of the protesters, for example, across all the countries, not just Syria, were young people who kind of connected and utilized tools to kind of push messages out and communicate. Well, that's shared up to families as well. And different mediums on social, such as Skype, for example, are being used to keep families together and to stay connected. So if you look at my family, which is dispersed around the world right now, many of them in Syria, many of them dispersed in Europe and the United States and elsewhere as well. One of the ways that we stay in touch with each other is through Skype. It's the only non-hacked, knock on wood, non-hacked mechanism of communication that we can speak freely with one another. And I'll speak to family in Damascus and on Skype, and we'll have honest conversations about what's happening on the ground. In the meantime, we're hearing shelling in the background, all via Skype. So, in past years and past generations, it used to be over the phone, maybe, and you'd have to speak in code because you knew the lines were tapped. Well, social media, on one level, has given us the opportunity to break through those lines. On another level, it's a constant cat and mouse game where certain outlets are tapped, and you have to be careful as well.
But you know that in advance.
You know that, and
sort of,
usually
yes.
I'll speak in code until the person on the other side says, "Oh, why are you speaking in code, sir? I'll just talk to you normal." And it's clean or it's clear, and you hope and you pray that it hasn't been compromised.
That's fascinating. We're going to make you work for your supper here. So Fatima, how much, knowing that women and women's issues and women's studies are one of the things that you care the most deeply about, I'm interested to know, now you've come to the States, but you've been here before, but you're in Boston now for a little bit more than a year. What is your perception, and also when you think about the young women or women your age back in Saudi, and I asked you a few minutes ago, are you going to go back to Saudi after you got your master's degree, and that was the fastest yes I've heard. So tell us kind of as you sit and listen this morning, but also for the interest level and what you're seeing at Harvard and studying the religious ramifications as well, which is courageous among other things. So give us a thought what you're thinking about right now.
This is such a privilege being here, and it's a break from the library, honestly. So I came to Boston, I applied to different programs, and a few of them were like human rights or women and gender studies, and I was like, I think I want something more, because I come from a country where the religious discourse really plays a big role. And so I was brought up, and I lived my entire life in Saudi. I traveled a lot, but still I am a Saudi woman. And the educational curriculum, for example, shaped pretty much a lot of the way that I would perceive things, and then the way that I start questioning things at the end of my high school, for example. And that kind of shaped my aspiration to seek more and question more and understand the motives behind certain social norms, whether it was religion, whether it was traditions, whether it was authority playing a massive role of controlling certain things as forms of distracting people from major other issues that, don't want to be addressed. And so I thought religion would be something I'd, pursue with women on the side. I think women in Saudi are highly creative individuals because of the restrictions. And so when you're just free and everything is available for you, it's very easy. You don't think because it's just there. You don't have to think about it or have to think of other ways of like, let's put it this way, like manipulating the system or, like having this abstract system there that you don't know where the red line is makes you think. And for a lot of time, you didn't know that women thought, or you didn't know that they were actually going through this because they weren't the voice. There wasn't this tool. And these conversations that we were talking about that were happening late at night happened before, but they happened only in our minds. And this tool happened in a way that, like, bring it all out, and I'll support you with my voice and your voice and her voice. And it's this support group in a way, knowing that you're not alone, and then recognizing how creative individuals have become.
Are you unusual among your gal pals? Say you've got, pick a number, 8, 10, 12 really good friends back home, or sisters. Pardon me, I don't know about your family. But do they think are you like really the black sheep? Are you one of them? Have you gotten them thinking in different ways? Have you been their leader? Or are they like distancing themselves from you? Like?
So I think it really depends on the circle of friends. So I have my school friends that are maybe more traditional.
College friends? College, you mean, or
no,
younger?
like high school, like the ones that I grew up with are more traditional in a sense where, either chose to get married and settle, maybe work, but also, or like, of course, pursue education, that's not a question, but still more of like, not very progressive and not very out there, maybe not as active on social media, or if they're on the social media, but it's very personal, friends and small circles of family. But on the other hand, I think being out there on the social media, like I have friends from Twitter. I made friends through Twitter. I made friends through, I'd meet someone and I'm like, oh, I know you. You're my friend on Twitter. And this is how, and so I'm not the black sheep among this group of people, of course, because there are a lot of them. And it becomes very interesting where you're like, I thought I was always the black sheep, and I'm not anymore. And so you see how you're not that.
Are you scaring your father?
I think I was scaring them like more a few years back, but then now because they see that I'm not the black sheep anymore, and because they recognize that this is happening, and they recognize that it's not only their daughter that's going through this. It's like it's a society, and so.
Maybe quietly, your father's probably very proud of you. He may just not be able to say it.
Maybe.
Okay, let's move on. Sarah, regarding social media specifically, has it helped people in your country, well, you're in the U.S., but back in Syria, on authoritarianism, being disenfranchised, political discord? Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I know we've kind of touched on some of those subjects already, but you want to elaborate maybe a little bit?
Sure. I mean, this is the first time, what we're living these days today is the first time in 4 decades that ordinary Syrians have the opportunity to speak freely and publicly about their lot in life, their reality. Not just political, but from day-to-day social bread and butter issues all the way up to overthrowing a regime. This is all public discourse in today's world. And so you can only imagine after, I'm in my late 30s, not once in my entire life have I ever mentioned or uttered anything in public against this regime. And that's me living here or as an expat. So you can only imagine, and we don't speak because of fear and the fear of retribution and what will happen to not just yourself, but your family if you do speak out. And we have decades of scars to show what happens when you do speak out, and that you're seeing some of that today. But also you can only imagine the profound impact on an entire society that has been confined for these decades. And this is why you see such an uptake, not just in social media, but around the nation in terms of vocal expression, creative expression. Early, the first year of the revolution was called, it was the revolution of song. And you saw the proliferation all over Syria of music, and music, revolutionary music. And it was an expression of a population that for so long had to utilize music only for pop or to sing praises to the bath, for example. And it was this kind of finite use of music and expression. Now, if you look and you Google, everyone should Google songs of the Syrian Revolution, and you'll see this mass influx of music from around the country, all aspects of the country, all levels of society, talking about their realities as a Syrian. Now, this could never exist before. And not only that, what social media has done is created this opportunity for different areas that are not in touch with each other to almost compete in a way. And so people will share their stories, their music, their realities, their videos, and then, maybe a town 100 miles away will be like, wait a second, we have this too, and we'll basically, through their local coordinating committees.
Syria's got talent.
Yeah, Syria has definitely got talent.
Actually, there's a piece I was reading the other day about an young American woman who has studied Arabic music.
I saw that.
And so she's competing, and there's a lot of back and forth as well. She's not an Arab, so how could she be, competing for Arab Got Talent? Switching a bit, Holly, what kind of resistance did you and your editors and producers get as you move from country to country trying to find the story? Because at the end of the day, a documentary filmmaker is really a storyteller, and you're a storyteller. I mean, were there some families where they just would not allow that girl to be filmed, frightened, or whatever it is? So,
well, it probably won't surprise you that the two most difficult places for us were Afghanistan and Egypt. Afghanistan, we went in with a very trusted partner, and we went into the north, where there's more, there's less fighting, and the circumstances are better. But still, the interviews with the girls took place in the cover of night, in the women's section of the houses, after the men had eaten, and then the women eat, and then there's quiet time for the women. And so it was through whispers, basically, at night, that we ended up finding just one young woman, not a girl, she's 21. Her story is a retrospective story, but one woman who was willing to share her story. And what a story it is about being married at age 11 so that her brother could have a truck in exchange for her hand. And then we didn't shoot that story in Afghanistan. It was too dangerous to actually shoot there, so we shot somewhere else. And then Egypt, Mona Al-Tahawi was our writer in Egypt. For those of you who haven't heard about the way we made Girl Rising, we interviewed hundreds of girls in each country that we visited, 9 countries. We chose 5 or 6 finalists, if you will, to be the subject of the film. Each one of the stories highlighted a barrier to education that girls face in that country or in that region. And we left the decision about which girl would be in the film to a writer who would come from the same country as the girl and who would achieve global acclaim for her skills as a storyteller. So as an adult and as a minister of words, if you will, she could layer her experience growing up in that country as she shared the girl's experience. So Mona Al-Tahawi was our Egyptian writer. And some of you may remember that Mona is the journalist whose arms were broken, whose wrists were broken when she went to Tahrir Square during the revolution. And she was there that day because she was on her trip where she was to meet the Girl Rising girl that she had chosen. And that was a Twitter experience. We learned of her capture on Twitter. She tweeted on her way to the police station. She tweeted about how the guards had sexually harassed her and groped her and how they had assaulted her. She ended up in the hospital with broken arms. She tweeted those pictures. It was an overnight sensation, and we were worried actually that she would back away from doing the film after this horrible incident, but in fact the story that she was telling was about sexual violence. And she was more determined than ever to use her platform to raise the awareness about that story. You know, in other places where sexual violence, and I'm sure all of you guys know as well as I, that sexual violence is one of the worst follow-on effects of the revolution in Egypt. You know, women feel and girls feel more unsafe today in Egypt than ever before, because it's an offshoot of all that disruption. And one of the things that I would say out of this discussion and throw out to all of you guys when it's time is the challenge with social media is that it's really good at breaking things down. It's really good at fomenting the sense and getting the voice out that this is not the world we want. But because it often lacks a central leader, because it's a revolution by many, putting the pieces back together is really difficult. Even with Girl Rising, right? Girl Rising is all about educating girls in the developing world and giving them a full opportunity to reach their full potential. And that includes things like ending child marriage and ending child labor. But it's different everywhere you go. So we have now this network of girl champions, and our next challenge is, okay, everyone's excited to do something. How do we help to organize them? How do we help to organize them when every society looks different? The same answers for women in Syria are different from the answers for women in Saudi, and they're different from the challenges in Egypt and in Mumbai and India. So it's that question of, once we foment, how do we provide structure and guidance to
It's a very interesting question, because some of us have done some reading on the subject in preparation for today. And there's a Malcolm Gladwell piece commenting on someone else's article in Foreign Affairs. It's actually a slightly dated article now, it's a couple of years old, but making exactly that point, that if the foundation for change is not kind of, if you will, bricks and mortar, the social revolution that the internet has allowed, in digital and tweeting and everything else, I don't want to say in any way that it's frosty on the top, because it's not, but it's unleashing something that needs to have the foundation to really build. We're about to run out of time. I want to make sure we ask the audience if they have a question or two. But Jen, let me come back to you for a second, and then I want to touch briefly on Women Who Drive, because it was something and I couldn't hear how much you talked about it because we were off stage in a prior conversation, but since you're the younger person on our panel today. But Jen, as you said about it, you were so positive about your experience for the 4.5 years in Saudi and visiting every community and so many villages and everything. So how hopeful are you for the change that must come, and do you think it's going to come? What's your thought?
I think I'm on.
Am I on?
Is it on? Yeah. Honestly, it was a privilege to be there for 4 years. I do believe we're in a moment of history. You are hearing now stories of almost evidence of this change, this technological change. But it's tapping something that I observed. When I first got there, I remember kind of searching for what were because it's a very conservative society, a very rich culture. And I kept searching for what are the foundations of thought in this society? What are the Islamic approaches to governance? What are the Islamic approaches to ethics? To, in my case, macroeconomics, which is what I teach. And what I realized is, and this is not just true there, obviously our own country debates this, there has been an emphasis over, let's say, since the 60s in both Egypt and in the region itself and in Saudi Arabia, to really encourage children and in the curricula, and especially in college, to only focus on science and technology. And so the majors, even Morsi, who went to my college, USC, he was an engineer. The majors that are really emphasized, science, technology, medicine, engineering, some business, obviously education if you're going to be teaching, but it's really that side of the spectrum of knowledge. And so the assumptions that we make as Americans about that, touching those issues, the ideas of mankind, what is justice, what is order, representation, are aspects of a conversation that has not yet begun there, to me. as I looked at this, because I kept searching for it. I kept wanting to meet Islamic scholars and engage with them, studying together, so I could appreciate it. And so there's an irony here. It's the technology, actually, of social media that I hope, in my optimism about the region, I hope opens the door to a new richness in Islamic culture that does pursue these issues in the nature of human relations with each other. Syria is an example of the basic question, is there a way, in the context of Islam and the culture of the Middle East, for groups, tribes, sects to live with each other without violence? These are basic human questions. And so I think the social media revolution is opening the door for young people to ask their parents and to ask Islamic scholars and clerics, how can we think through these issues together? Because the region itself has to ask itself, is this what we want for Fatima's future? I'm so delighted that she's majoring at Harvard in the topic she is, because that is the beginning of the discussion and the foundation of a future.
I'm going to ask you just to touch on it, because we as the Americans visiting a few weeks ago were fascinated because the whole Women Who Drive had just been publicized so much, and the 30-second video of Women No Drive, I think is the correct name for it. And I think that our incredibly gracious Saudi hosts and hostesses brought the subject up sooner than we did, because they knew it was very much on our mind. So is it a really huge issue? I mean, as an American, and I hear someone with a PhD from Harvard or whatever who returns to her country and cannot drive, is it emblematic of something more? Or is, as I said to one woman there, you know, this whole issue of not driving, and her comment was, well, it's not very important to us because we all have drivers. And I thought to myself, I don't think that's the point. But maybe it is the point. And Janet, you had said on the phone the other day that is there something uniquely special about being the only country in the world that does not allow women to drive, that allows Saudi Arabia to think of that as something positive? So just close off our panel, because I'm going to ask her a question or two. I'm seeing the big flash over there. But just give us your thoughts on it, because you're like right in the middle.
So, I think it's not, I mean, I'm supporting the woman driving campaign and everything, but I'm not supporting it because I want to drive, because maybe it's not a very relevant issue that I'm dealing with daily, but I'm supporting it as on behalf of those that are struggling, and I know of their existence, and some of the women actually pay approximately 30% of their salaries on drivers and cars and public transportation, and so if there was public transportation, I would have just went with that because it's safer for the environment and it's safer for the people, and it's like, why not? But because that's not even an option, then let's just drive, and that those women that are struggling drive. For me, the driving issue is more of like public presence and a symbol of woman's ability to control her emotion and her activity than it is of like an actual driving act. So I'm definitely with the driving campaign, not because, and I'm very critical of the women that are campaigning because they just want to drive. And it's not about driving, it's more like because these women are struggling inside their home, and just because she's going to drive, it doesn't mean that she's going to be liberated on so many different aspects. But gradually, I believe, if women were able to reach out of their limits of the household, then that means there would be public presence for women, and that's what I'm seeking. I think this issue, for example, is like one that, relatively speaking, a lot of the society has already, they're just tired of talking about it. But at the same time, it makes Saudi Arabia a special case, and that's why it is favorable by some authority figures, that it makes women our situation of women is a symbol of how unique this place is. But on different aspects, I think, for example, it was easier to put the women campaign for driving out on the social media than to put other topics that are of more taboo in society, such as, LGBT rights or sexual violence or sectarianism or, things that are discussing more of like issues but still not well, or people just don't want to hear them yet. So that's when, personally, I'm afraid of, you've mentioned great things about how social media is another world, and this existence there is amazing, but then how connected is it to reality? And if it's very connected, then how visible do I want my reality to be on that world? Because sometimes I bring it out there, and then it would actually hinder me from moving on and creating this underground culture, for example. I don't want my presence to be only on the social media, speaking about the culture, the underground culture and the movement and everything, but then it would actually react in a form of resistance. And that would be to stop this underground culture from actually forming in reality. That's like, this sword with two sides of it, and two edges. And so it's a tool, but it's not a product, it's just a means for, and if it's going to hinder me, then no, I'm not going to publicize one of my events that I'm having to, discuss a certain topic on the social media. I'm just going to tell them, no tweets, people, just don't Instagram this or don't tweet about it,
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank the panel, each and every one of you. I think you were great, inspired, thoughtful, smart. So is there any, a question or two from the audience? Yes.
Thank all of you for a very interesting morning. My name is Dee Cutler, and going on from women not being able to drive, if anybody has seen the movie Voiceless, which is the story of a little girl who wants to ride a bicycle, I'd be curious if there is any reaction in Saudi Arabia, and if so, what?
You're going to be the spokesperson. There was quite a discussion of the film when we were there, and it was interesting because there were two totally different points of view. That it was quite inaccurate. It just couldn't be, and then others who said it was exactly what.
So this is funny because
I'm not sure if everybody knows what it is, so maybe just.
Yeah. Okay. So Wajda is about it's a Saudi film by a Saudi filmmaker, a female Saudi filmmaker. Her name is Haifa al-Mansour, and also the actresses in the movie are Saudi, so that makes it a bit interesting. And it's about the struggle of a young child who struggles to ride a bicycle and compete with her male friend in a neighborhood in Saudi. So interestingly, in 2010, there was a documentary, and it filmed me personally riding a bike in my neighborhood in Jeddah. And my photo was like on, thankfully back then there wasn't Twitter, because if there was Twitter, then I would have been in a huge trouble because of this sense of like, I would have been hashtagged. And I would have been like in major trouble, but it was huge on Facebook and on traditional newspaper-based media, and so it's interesting to see how in 2010 I was filmed in a documentary, which is not fiction, it's real, and the backlash of the huge backlash that I received of how a Saudi female rides a bicycle in Saudi Arabia. My photo was like in every single newspaper. It was insane, and people were upset and angry. But now, in 2013, you see people empathizing with this child, maybe because she's a child and not a woman, I guess. And I think it's a catalyst for discussion, this movie, on so many levels, because it also addresses things like the father's marriage to another woman and forming another family, and the woman-man kind of relationship, father dynamics with his child, and whether he's involved in her life or not. And you see all these different aspects that are addressed, but in regards to the bicycle, it's not even a car, it's just a bicycle, but it's a huge topic that addresses religion, politics, and social traditions. And it's not only just society. So for example, with the women campaign for driving, one thing that was like highlighted was that for so many years the government would say, you know, we're waiting for the society to be ready for women to drive, and when society is ready, you will drive. And with a campaign, you see that way society seems ready. Yeah. And so that addresses like, so who's in control? Like, are you just telling us this in a way to distract us, or are we, who's waiting for who, you know? And I don't know, this is just an interesting, you know, way of like addressing who's in control. Do you think that you're in control? Well, in fact, you're not really in control.
So you're studying religion at Harper?
Yeah, it's really.
The question was, is Fatima studying religion at Harvard or comparative religion?
I just want to make a very quick comment. I know we're out of time. But I think it's a way to appease religious forces. I mean, you're driving a car is not the actual. Most women in Saudi Arabia, they drive everywhere else. In Europe and in the United States. So it's not the actual driving. It's chaperoning these women and making sure that somebody else is make sure they're behaving correctly.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's beyond the driving.
Yeah, I keep telling them, because my background is in psychology, so I'm like, if in Saudi we were diagnosed with some disorders, we would all have dependent personality disorders. Because like, we all depend on someone, and it's not a disorder. This is the order, you know? This is how we function.
Appeasing religious forces. It's not that society is not ready. It's they want to make sure that these sort of fundamentalist kind of religious forces are approving that.
It's clear that we could go on for a very long time, but I'm seeing a flashing hand over there because we want to make room and time for the next panel. So thank you for listening to us, and thank you.